Hello and welcome to the church at Hiraeth. We've got something a little bit different for you today. Got some stories that my uncle Brian has written. He lives in Hertfordshire. He wrote them for his church and it's called Martin the Mole. They're stories with a little bit of a moral at the end, so I do hope you enjoy this one. This one's called Mr. Mole's Special Dinner. Martin stared at his father in horror. "But Dad, Mum never does it like that," he exclaimed. Mr. Mole turned towards Martin and gave a chuckle. Maybe not, but I think you'll like it." Martin shook his head, sighed and left the kitchen. Mrs. Mole, Martin's mum, had gone to see her sister who hadn't been well. She would be away for 2 days, and although she'd left plenty of food for Martin and his father, Mr. Mole had decided time was right for him to do some cooking. Tonight they were to have worm and beetle casserole. Earlier that day, Mr. Mole had told Martin to go into the woods and the nearby fields and collect whatever root vegetables could be found. Martin had been quite excited and, taking a large bag with him, had walked to the edge of the woods where he had collected dandelion and nettle roots. But it was in the fields just outside the woods that he had dug up parsnips, potatoes, carrots and turnips, and joy of joys, on his way back through the woods he had found some small mushrooms which he had carefully placed in his bag. Dad would be pleased. By the time Martin returned home, his father had already begun his preparations. Mr. Mole had been delighted with the produce Martin had brought home, and Martin settled down happily to watch his father demonstrate his cooking skills. It suddenly occurred to Martin that he'd never seen his father cook before. In fact, thought Martin, had his father ever cooked before? This thought grew stronger in Martin's head as he watched his father roughly chop the dandelion and nettle roots, parsnips, potatoes, carrots, turnips and mushrooms, and put the pieces in a large saucepan of water. Martin was about to say, "But Dad, you haven't washed the soil off," when Mr. Mole put up his hand and said, "Don't say a thing." Martin decided it would be wise to say nothing. Next, Mr. Mole shook out a handful of dried beetles and worms that he kept in a jar and added these to the vegetables. And it was when Mr. Mole crumbled a wormo cube into the saucepan that Martin had said, "But Dad, Mum never does it like that," and left the kitchen. Martin wandered disconsolately down the path from his home and into the woods. He wished his mum was at home preparing his evening meal. There was no doubt in his mind that his father's efforts would be horrible. Should he refuse to eat it? No, that wouldn't be a very nice thing to do. Should he pretend to like it? No, that wouldn't do either. His father might give him some more. Or should he just swallow it down and concentrate on finishing it without tasting it? Martin decided this was probably his best option. By the time he'd reached this conclusion, he found that he'd walked in a circle and was back at his front door. He also realised that he was very hungry. As he opened the door, he was met by a delicious smell. He'd never smelled anything quite as delicious before, and he ran into the kitchen where his father was sitting quietly, drinking a cup of nettle tea. "Wow, Dad, that smells great. What did you do?" Mr. Mole smiled and said, "Oh, just a few herbs and spices, and you can't beat a wormo cube." When the meal was ready, Martin ate it in silence, and this was not just because of his earlier decision to swallow it down and concentrate on finishing it, but because the taste and texture was nothing like he'd had before. When he'd finished, he looked at his father with new respect and said, "But you didn't make it the way Mum makes it." "No," said Mr. Mole thoughtfully. "You mustn't think that there is only one way of doing things, and because it's always been done that way, it must be the right way." It was Martin's turn to look thoughtful. "Will you tell Mum how to do it your way?" Mr. Mole looked even more thoughtful. One day perhaps."
There are many things that we could take from that short story, which was great, by the way, Brian. And for me, it's that important principle that so often in life we continue down the same old road because we get comfortable and complacent, what do we call it? In a rut. Why not try something different? And in that context, and especially from where we are in this clip, why not try Christ? Why not try God? Why not try faith?
The hymn we've got for today is How Great Thou Art. We're going to do the first verse and then the third verse later on. Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the works thy hand hath made, I see the stars, I hear the mighty thunder, thy paths around the universe display. Then sings my soul, my Saviour God to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Saviour God to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art.
A couple of verses from John chapter 8, verse 32 tells us, it was Jesus speaking, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Freedom is an important thing, isn't it, in life? In the last few weeks, I've travelled to Montenegro, Hungary, and Moldova. And the common denominator between those three countries is not that long ago, they were all living under brutal communist dictatorships. Whether it was Montenegro, part of the Yugoslavian Federation ruled over by Tito, or Hungary, albeit still an independent nation but very much beyond the Iron Curtain, or Moldova, which didn't even exist as a nation in its own right, but one of the Soviet socialist republics. Freedom was not allowed in the way that we understand it today. Freedom is important. My latest trip to Moldova, I went for a walk, as I always do when I go to these places. I have a tourist gene, I love to feed it. And I came across a monastery. And then I realised after researching it that it's one of the famous monasteries in Moldova. It's in the capital, Chisinau. And when the Soviets took over, they, as with all the other hardcore communist regimes, were anti-faith. So Christianity was frowned upon. It was dealt with in many different ways, but there was not the freedom to practice your faith as a believer. And lots of the churches and the monasteries were closed down, turned into exhibition centres. Since they've had their independence, Moldova at the start of the 1990s, it's now back to being a monastery and a church. In fact, while I was there was a service of some kind about to start. I don't know what it was because it wasn't in English, but it looked like a wedding or a blessing of some description based on the people that were there. But that would not have been allowed to have taken place openly during the years of communism. Jesus, in the verses that we've just looked at, was talking about freedom, spiritual freedom. When he comes into our lives, he brings that freedom. Like Martin the Mole, we can try something different and find actually that it's far superior to that which we had before. But as well as spiritual freedom, it's also good to live in general freedom, in a society where we can speak our own mind, where we don't get attacked, whether physically or in other ways by the authorities for having an opinion that does not agree with the state. That's communism. And communism and Christianity do not go together. There is a Grand Canyon gap between the two. Whenever we have found communism, or we do find it in the world today, for example in China and North Korea, Christianity and other religions as well, but Christianity is persecuted. It's either frowned upon and maybe tolerated by some individuals, but generally it is persecuted. Freedom is important, and I think in the Western world at this moment in time we are fighting a battle for the heart and soul of our nations, and most definitely in the United Kingdom at this particular time. And at the heart of that freedom, it's not just a political freedom or some other aspect of that word, but also spiritual freedom as well. Jesus came that we might be free. I've been through those 3 countries that I've mentioned, or been into those 3 countries that I've mentioned just now. I've been to others as well. And after throwing off the shackles of communism, none of them have gone back. They don't want to go back. When you try something different, you try something new, like Martin the Mole did, and he realizes that actually this is far superior to what we had before. They don't want to go back. Freedom, treasure it, hold on to it, fight for it. It's important, whether it's that spiritual freedom to practice our faith openly like I am now. People might not watch my Christian-based videos, that's fine. But at least I've got the freedom to talk in the way that I do. How long will that happen in the United Kingdom? Don't take it for granted. It's something that we all have to stand for. Spiritual freedom is the greatest freedom of all, but every aspect of freedom is equally important. If you've been blessed and encouraged by today's service, why not share it? You can do so by sharing the video on YouTube if that's where you are connecting with us, or if you're on my website you can share that particular blog post. But it's good if you're a Christian especially to share, to encourage, to spread the good news of the gospel far and wide. And social media is an excellent platform in which to do so. We hear so much negativity about social media, but it's like the television. You can use it for good or you can use it for bad. You can watch good things or you can watch harmful, destructive things. And on my website as well, we've got every The Church at Hiraeth service since we started this, which was last year now. So we've been going for quite some time. Stay blessed, and we'll see you next week.